And welcome to Hope, Faith, and Joy Daily Devotion with me, Pastor Amanda. We have actually made it all the way to the end of Genesis. I can't believe it, chapter 50. I think we'll dive into Exodus starting tomorrow, since it kind of goes together. And then we'll probably pop back into the New Testament after we do Exodus. So let's dive into this last chapter of Genesis. So, what we find here is that we have a moment where Joseph mourns that Jacob has died. And he actually does something kind of unique in that we find out that Jacob or Israel is embalmed. So, uh, the Egyptian process of death is actually included in his death. And so we kind of see the merging of cultures in here. And so I find that to be kind of interesting. But we also find in here that there are required days of mourning, of lamenting, of being sad. And what I love about this is it reminds us that when someone dies, when we've experienced any kind of loss, whether it be loss of life, loss of job, loss of purpose, whatever kind of loss we are experiencing. And remember, even when you have good things happening in your life, you can be getting married, you could be having a kid or something like that, but there's still that loss of maybe your individual freedom, of the loss of the way things used to be. So within loss, needs to be a time of grieving. And guess what? Grieving lasts a long time. We find in this scripture that the first grieving period of time was 40 days. So that's like our Lenten journey. So that's quite a bit. That's over a month of mourning. And then it says that there was then another 70 days of mourning that happened. And so we recognize that this process of grieving takes a long time. And so often our culture tries to make us rush through this process. So often we are pushed to like get over it. And honestly, it can be many years before we're able to truly process our grieving. But most grieving takes a minimum of 6 weeks, just like this 40 days, a minimum. And that's for something that's expected and know that you're happening. So if it's unexpected or a lifelong relationship gone, it can be much longer. And we find that even for Joseph in here, because we see that he has a request that his father is not to be buried in Egypt, that he's to go back to be with his family. And so Joseph recognized that this is going to be a long trip. It's not going to be an easy trip. And so that process of taking his father to where he's going to be buried, it continues the mourning process. And then when they're there, they also have a period of mourning while they're at the grave. And I think right now, our whole world is mourning. Um, and no matter what level you're mourning at right now, we've all experienced COVID and we lost a way of life for a season. And we lost so many of our regular routines and our activities. We're still not meeting in church. And part of that creates a grieving process that all of us are experiencing. And we shouldn't necessarily put the pressure on ourselves to get over it so quickly as to work through it and work with it, and just recognizing that this is natural and it's the way we do it. And so I actually find chapter 50 to be very healing and soothing to me, especially right now, because I know I have personally been struggling with the grief I've been feeling and wondering where is it coming from and why am I doing it. Kind of like it makes sense now of what's going on. So then what we find out after this, really, we're not given much more information about what happens with Joseph, other than he did his duties well as the advisor that he was. He lived to be 110 years. Oh, we do have this little spot here, though. I almost forgot, where the brothers come back to Joseph again after their father's death, and they kind of make up a story in order to get on Joseph's good side. But they're very worried that with his father's death, that he could be angry again with them and hate them after all that has happened. And so they say, our father said that you should forgive us for our crime. And we have this beautiful moment where we see that Joseph, it says he wept. He's so sad that they're still so scared of him, that they're so worried about him. It upsets him that they didn't accept his forgiveness the first time. But how often is that? It takes a couple of times for forgiveness to set in. But he reminds them to do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do me harm, God intended it for good in order to preserve a numerous people as he is doing today. So have no fear. I myself will provide for you and your little ones. In this way, he reassured them, speaking kindly to them. I love that. And so we just see this sense of forgiveness and protection, reconciliation that happens in the family. But I think it's interesting how the brothers are like, okay, we might need to remind him that he's still forgiven us, and their insecurity in that. And I think we've all had those moments where we weren't sure if we were really forgiven or just kind of partially forgiven. So we see that. So then Joseph, we find out, lives 110 years and then he passes away. And he actually makes the remark that once we return to our land that has been promised to us, take my bones there. But for the time being, I'll be buried in Egypt. But when it is time, he recognizes that he's part of a bigger promise. He's part of a bigger story and time, and he wants to be placed where his family will eventually end up. And that's kind of where we end. Genesis is with Joseph's death, and then we're gonna have, as we start into Exodus, we're gonna have many years that have passed, and we'll jump into that tomorrow. But I have to tell you something weird. I had never noticed it before. There are 40 chapters in Exodus, one chapter for every year that they were in the wilderness. Never put that together. So excited to start Exodus tomorrow. Thanks for joining me today with Hope, Faith, and Joy Daily Devotion, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.